called Azuka all sorts of unprintable names, blaming her for their childlessness. And as Azuka listened to the hurtful words of her mother-in-law, her heart shattered into a million pieces. She felt a heavy burden in her heart as the pressure to conceive weighed heavily on her shoulders. Once upon a time, there lived a young woman named Azuka. Azuka was an extremely beautiful woman who was envied by all the other women in the village. She was so beautiful that all the men wanted her for a wife. Even the prince of the village approached Azuka to ask for her hand in marriage, promising her the whole world. But Azuka turned down his proposal, saying that her heart belonged to another. Azuka was deeply in love with Eze, who was a popular fisherman in the village, and her family wondered what Azuka saw in Eze to turn down the marriage proposal of the prince. Their love story was one many could not understand, considering the strange sacrifice Azuka was making to choose a poor fisherman over the prince of their village. But as time went by, the villagers got to accept the reality of their relationship as Azuka got married to Eze and became his wife. After so many years of being married, Azuka and Eze were still yet to hear the cry of a baby in their home. All their peers who got married years after they got married all had children, and this put Azuka under a lot of pressure as she did everything within her power to have a child. One day, Azuka's mother-in-law visited their home with another woman. She informed her son Eze that she had brought a woman for him to marry because his wife Azuka had refused to give her a grandchild. She called Azuka all sorts of unprintable names, blaming her for their childlessness. And as Azuka listened to the hurtful words of her mother-in-law, her heart shattered into a million pieces. She felt a heavy burden in her heart as the pressure to conceive weighed heavily on her shoulders. She could see the disappointment in the eyes of everyone and couldn't stand being judged. So Azuka ran out of her hut and kept running, hoping to get to the end of the earth where no one would ever find her. Eze tried to run after his wife, but his mother obstructed him, saying that if he ever stepped his foot outside his hut, he would never see her again in his life. Eze, being his mother's favorite child, could not risk his mother deserting him, so he stayed back to listen to her as she convinced him to marry a second wife. Eze, although hesitant at first, heeded to his mother's advice and accepted to marry a second wife. Later that evening, Azuka returned to the news of her husband's decision to take on a second wife. Devastated and heartbroken, Azuka confronted Eze about the news, but his mother jumped in and challenged her, saying that Ifeyiwa had come to give them a child and that Azuka should either accept Ifeyiwa as her co-wife or leave her son alone. Eze pleaded with his wife Azuka to be more understanding and accepting of the situation, assuring her that his love for her remained unchanged. But Azuka, unable to withstand the constant humiliation from her mother-in-law and the idea of her husband getting married to another woman, decided to retreat quietly into her hut as she wept. Her husband Eze performed the traditional marital rites for Ifeyiwa, and shortly afterwards, Ifeyiwa got pregnant and the news spread around the village as people began to gossip, calling Azuka a barren woman. Even Eze's mother spared no opportunity to mock Azuka with Ifeyiwa's pregnancy, and although Azuka bore no grudge for her co-wife, she could not help but feel dejected by all that was happening. Her husband began to show Ifeyiwa more attention and love, and this broke Azuka's heart to watch a man who who once assured her of his undying love, professed the same love to another woman. One morning, this was a few months later, a loud scream was heard from Ifeyinwa's room. Her pregnancy, which was due in a few weeks, mysteriously disappeared, and Ifeyinwa was terrified as to how this was possible. She screamed at the top of her voice, accusing Azuka of stealing her pregnancy, as she could not think of anyone else who would want to harm her baby and herself. Ifeyinwa urged her husband to send Azuka away, as she feared what would happen if Azuka kept staying with them in the same hut. Her mother-in-law was in full support, and Eze, without hesitation, chased Azuka away, and the entire village began to call her a wicked witch who stole her co-wife's pregnancy. Azuka, unable to face the villagers, left the village one night to a faraway place where no one knew her story. Eze and Ifeyinwa mourned the disappearance of their pregnancy and couldn't stand the mystery behind their missing pregnancy. Ifeyinwa, however, could not shake off the feeling that something was amiss. She was confronted with repeated dreams where she saw herself and Azuka heavily pregnant, running in the dream, and this troubled her greatly, as she could not stop herself from imagining that Azuka was behind her missing pregnancy. She then decided to secretly pay her powerful auntie a visit one hot afternoon to confirm her suspicion about the missing pregnancy. When she arrived at her auntie's hut, her auntie, without being told, revealed to her that someone from her household was behind her stolen pregnancy. Ifeyinwa, desperate to know who it was, pleaded with her auntie to reveal the person's identity, and her auntie revealed to her that her mother-in-law, who she loved and trusted with her life, was the one behind the disappearance of her pregnancy. Unable to bear the weight of this revelation, Ifeyinwa rushed back to the village to confront her mother-in-law. She arrived at her hut and caught sight of a group of people gathered in front of her hut. Confused as to what was happening, Ifeyinwa walked into her hut and met her mother-in-law, who had now gone mad. Immediately her mother-in-law caught sight of her, she began to confess all that happened. She revealed that many years ago, her son Eze fell extremely ill and was on the brink of death. Eze was her only son, who she had after over 10 years of waiting. She approached a very powerful man to save his life, but the man informed her that her son was destined to die. Desperate and unwilling to accept her son's fate, she pleaded with the juju man, who promised to spare her son's life in exchange for a life-altering sacrifice. The juju man demanded the life of the firstborn child born into the family after Eze's recovery in exchange for her son's life. Blinded by the love she had for her son, she reluctantly agreed to the juju man's terms, and Eze's life was spared. However, when Eze got married and was unable to have a child with his wife Azuka, the evil juju man told her that if her son fails to have a child soon, he would have no other option but to strike her with madness, which will eventually lead to her death. Filled with extreme fear, Eze's mother did all she could to ensure that her son had a child. She mounted extreme pressure on Azuka, and when she noticed that the pregnancy was not forthcoming, she decided to bring in a second wife for her son, and was delighted when his second wife, Ifeyinwa, became pregnant with child. On the night when Ifeyinwa's pregnancy disappeared, Eze's mother covered Ifeyinwa's stomach with a strange cloth as she slept, and the pregnancy disappeared to the altar of the evil juju man. Little did she know that this was going to be the greatest mistake she had ever made in her life. The pregnancy, which she thought belonged to her son, was indeed not her son's pregnancy, as Ifeyinwa was carrying the child of another man. Because of this singular mistake, Eze's mother was struck with madness and had a short time to live. Ifeyinwa stood frozen as she could not believe all that she heard. She pleaded with Eze to forgive her for her deception, and Eze, filled with rage, sent her away saying that he never wanted to see her again in his life. Eze, who had blindly followed his mother's misguided path, was now confronted with the consequences of his actions. He did everything within his power to save his mother's life, but all his efforts proved futile as his mother died a few days after her confession. The entire village was thrown into a state of confusion as they struggled to grapple with the reality that Azuka, who they labeled a wicked witch, was in fact innocent of the accusations. Eze, filled with guilt, decided to journey from one village to the other in search of his wife Azuka. After months of intense search, he found Azuka and could not believe his eyes. He stood before her with his eyes, reflecting pain and regret as he apologized to her for all he had put her through in the past. Azuka, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, accepted his apology and Eze was over the moon. He pleaded with her to return with him back to their village, but Azuka revealed to him that she was already married to a man who loved her and cherished her with his life, and they were already expecting a child. Eze, on hearing this, fell to his knees in regret as he could not believe how he ruined his life with his own hands. Eze learned the harshest lessons life could ever offer as he vowed never to blindly follow the misguided path of others, especially when it involves the life of those he loves. The lesson to be learned from this story is that we should not do evil to others as it always backfires. We should also be cautious of the decisions we make in life as they can have far-reaching consequences not only for us but for the people around us. I hope you enjoyed the story. Like, subscribe and leave a comment. It helps us grow our channel. I'll see you in our next story. Bye.